Welcome to Humanities Montana's virtual happy hour with Lowell Jaeger, who will lead us through the art of meaningful conversation. And with that, I'm just going to let you take it away, Lowell.
Okay, well, Sam is going to be master host of all technology here because I'm still working my way up to the 21st century. I'm taking 2 courses this summer in teaching online. They're online courses. So I've probably quadrupled what I know about technological stuff in the last month or so, but that's probably still way behind most of the rest of you. So bear with me. I've never done this online before like this, although I've been leading these conversations now for Humanities Montana for, I think, over 15 years. Kim, when was it we went to Chicago? Was that about 15 years ago?
15 or even maybe 16.
Whoa.
I can't remember. We're
Yeah.
old.
Yeah, so Kim and I and some other people went to Chicago to be trained to do this thing, and I just totally fell in love with the whole process, and I've been doing it ever since. And I've changed my whole classroom style of teaching because of this. And I guess I just thought it was important to tell you from the get-go that this is really came out of some turbulent times that we had in the beginning of the century with the fall of the World Trade Towers. And I noticed right away that, our culture had a lot of difficulty talking about important things after that. We began to sort of really struggle to be civil when having conversations about significant social and political things. And I saw it in the classroom too. Suddenly we just couldn't talk anymore. So I began really pursuing the ideas on how to come back to getting people to talk in a civil and thoughtful manner about important things, because I don't think we still do that very well. If you watch the news, etc., we're mostly arguing and name calling and doing all that. And I feel really funny about my students now in class. Most of them are about 18, 19 years old. So this is the only world they've ever known, a world post 9/11, in which we are very polarized and very we don't get along very well when it comes to talking about important things. So anyway, this whole thing came out of that, and surprisingly, it was a lot of fun. It's been really, really fun over the years to do this thing, and I get consistent feedback from audiences talking about that there was initial trepidation sometimes when it says conversations about important things. People think, well, this is going to be pretty highfalutin. And mostly it's getting back to being not highfalutin, but getting back to being friendly and being open about our ideas and sharing and having some fun. And so Humanities Happy Hour, I'm not telling you what's in this cup, but it looks like a coffee cup. And that's all I will say. Let's get down to it. Here's the process. The process is all about generally, before this electronic stuff had to happen, what would happen is we'd walk into the room together and there'd be a circle of chairs and people would sit together within that circle, and we read a short piece of literature, and we take a moment to reflect about a particular thought or a particular question, and then we begin examining that short piece of literature. And in that conversation, which can go anywhere, and even if we did the same, I've done the poem, for instance, Mending Wall by Robert Frost, probably about 45 or 50 times, and I'm not kidding. So some people have done it 4 or 5 times who've been in my groups, and they say every time it's different, and every time they learn something new. And here's the thing is, I do too, because I don't have any answers to start with, but I notice that in talking with people, the same thing that they notice is we can learn a whole lot by sharing. And so that's just what this is all about. So let's start with reading the piece. Some of you may have read it already online and some not, but it's useful, I think, just to open our ears for a moment and hear it read. I'm wondering, Sam, maybe would you read it the first time through?
Government by Marie Howe. Standing next to my old friend, I sense that his soldiers have retreated, and mine, they're resting their guns on their shoulders, talking quietly. I'm hungry, one says. Cheeseburger, says another, and they all decide to go and find some dinner. But the next day, negotiating the two narrow aisles of the Health and Harmony food store, when I say, "Excuse me," to the woman in her cart of organic chicken and green grapes, she pulls the cart not quite far back enough for me to pass, and a small mob in me begins picking up the fruit to throw. So many kingdoms, and in each kingdom so many people. The disinherited son, the corrupt counselor, the courtesan, the fool, and so many gods arguing among themselves, over toast, through the lunch salad, and on into the long hours of the mild spring afternoon. I'm the god. No, I'm the god. No, I'm the god. I can hardly hear myself over their muttering. How can I discipline my own army? They're exhausted and want more money. How can I disarm when my enemy seems so intense?
All right, thanks, Sam. Usually with audiences, I don't use the word poem or poetry, and it's sad because I'm a poet and I write poetry. but you know, people have a certain sort of set of expectations when you say poem or poetry, and this poem would really sort of not disarm that because it's a little ambiguous, isn't it? But that's a perfect opportunity for conversation, is that ambiguity. uh, it leaves you sort of thinking more. What is it all about? What is it saying? How does it pertain? Let's read it one more time. It's always useful, I think, to read it at least twice. And let's get Randy in on the act. Randy, would you read?
Government. Standing next to my old friend, I sense that his soldiers have retreated, and mine, they're resting their guns on their shoulders, talking quietly. I'm hungry, one says. Cheeseburger, says another, and they all decide to go and find some dinner. But the next day, negotiating the two narrow aisles of the Health and Harmony food store, when I say, "Excuse me," the woman in her cart of organic chicken and green grapes, she pulls the cart not quite back enough for me to pass, and a small mob in me begins picking up the fruit to throw. So many kingdoms, and in each kingdom, so many people. The disinherited son, the corrupt counselor, the courtesan, the fool, and so many gods arguing among themselves over toast, through the lunch salad, and on into the long hours of the mild spring afternoon. I'm the god. No, I'm the god. No, I'm the god. I can hardly hear myself over their muttering. How can I discipline my own army? They're exhausted and want more money. How can I disarm when my enemy seems intent?
Thank you, Randy. So poetry really does ask us to kind of slow down, and that's the contrary direction to most things these days, but it asks us to just kind of slow down. And so reading it the first time, we kind of get part of it, and reading it the second time, you kind of, maybe I hope you felt you got more even, you begin to notice more. And the wonderful thing about working in the humanities is instead of finding more answers, we find more questions. And that's what I hope is happening to you. So let's start with a little reflection exercise, everybody. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, you don't have to share this with anyone else. You can during our conversation, if you like, you can share what you come up with during our little reflection here. Or towards the end of the conversation, I will ask if anybody wants to share, and you can throw it in then too. But I want you to think about for a moment, if you will. We'll just take 60 seconds of online internet silence to think about this. I want you to think about a time when you were sorely tempted to act out against someone else. Maybe you felt wrong, but you restrained yourself. So think of a time when you were sorely tempted to act out against someone else, and then maybe you restrained yourself. And I want you to ask your question of, why did you restrain yourself? Why did you restrain yourself? So let's take 60 seconds. I have a clock here on the wall, and I'll watch that, and I'll bring you back in 60 seconds. But just think about this. Remember, you don't have to share it. It's just a good time to do some thinking on your own. Okay? So go. There, that was 60 seconds. Invariably, people tell me that 60 seconds of quiet seems like 6 years of quiet. Why is, what, I'm curious, anybody have a reaction to that 60 seconds?
I think it seems easier on Zoom than in person.
It was interesting. I can't see you all, but in person, you can see that people start to fidget, even in just 60 seconds. Yeah. And yet, isn't there an experience there somewhere that I'm always reminded each time I do this, I wish I did it more. I wish I'd sit for 60 seconds and just be quiet. So does my wife. She wishes I would be quiet too for 60 seconds.
Well, Jeff and I are Quakers, and so
Aha.
it's a very short period of time.
Aha. Yeah. So you're accustomed to that.
We can do an hour, yeah.
An hour? We'll have to build our muscle up to that. We've got to get Yvonne and Jeff to do a whole presentation on silence. I think that would be worthwhile. That could be a humanities conversation right there. So here's a place to start is, if you think of this poem, if you that very first stanza says, standing next to my old friend, I sense that his soldiers have retreated, and mine, they're resting their guns on their shoulders. And that's a kind of strange place to begin in some ways. Why soldiers? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. I sense that his shoulders, his soldiers, my friend's soldiers, have retreated, and mine, they're resting their guns on their shoulders. What's your thoughts? Who wants to start? Be brave.
Well, I'm thinking tension, a tough discussion, conflict, and a little bit of a pause in the action.
Say more about conflict.
Perhaps an ex-lover or a good friend they've just had disagreement, partner, spouse, missing each other, disagreeing about something, and it feels like war to the narrator.
Metaphorically, it feels like war.
Right.
And so the soldiers, in that metaphor, what are the soldiers doing or thinking?
Perhaps parts of the narrator, different parts of the narrator want to do different things. Parts of the narrator want to reach out to the friend. Parts of the narrator want to continue to combat the friend. Parts of the narrator want to stand their ground. And there's conflict not only with the other person or the enemy in the war analogy or metaphor, but there's internal conflict. The soldiers themselves, even the ones on the same team or the same side, are a bit in conflict.
And so, can anyone add to that? I mean, do you have your own personal soldiers, and what are they?
I'm thinking it's like when we're, I think the soldiers kind of represent where you've got your arguments and your retorts and all lined up. And it sounds like they've finally kind of fallen back or at ease. And now you're maybe going to listen, or, you know, listening instead of bringing your own thoughts.
Yeah. At ease, you said, right? You
Yeah.
said at ease, yeah. What a funny term, military term even, at ease, you know, instead of on guard, at ease. So here the soldiers are at ease, huh? Jeanette, you look like you were going to say something a minute ago. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I'm just contemplating.
Okay.
Not ready yet.
You had like electricity coming out of
Oh,
your
did
ear.
I? No, too late in the day for that.
Okay, all right. Any thoughts there though?
Maybe in a minute.
All right. Okay.
Not quite ready.
All right. Who can add to that? I'm still wondering, you know, what is this experience of the soldiers that we each of us have, and what does that mean to have the soldiers either on guard or at ease?
I have this tendency to narrate the argument in my mind with whoever it is. And it's always when I'm getting ready in the morning. Because I'll usually wake up, do some emails, do some work, and then I start getting ready and doing my routine, and I have the fake fight in my head with whoever it is. And I read somewhere that it's that's just not good, because then when the conversation really does happen, you're primed and it escalates even more. So I've tried, especially this past year, to be just aware of that when I find my thoughts going in that direction, to direct.
Did you say the fake argument? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the fake fight, like the whoever I just, wherever my mind goes while I'm showering and getting ready or whatever conflict with someone I'm close to, or just someone I thought just wronged me, or whatever perceived slight. I'm just gonna, you know, let them have it. And I just have to, no one else, I guess, does anyone else do that? The fake fight? Yeah, like, this is what I'm gonna tell. And so I've tried to redirect that, to find myself doing that and redirect. So inevitably there's going to be conflict sometimes around the things that they come to mind because they're bothering me for so, but I try not to have the fight in my head.
And Randy, you use the word priming too. Can you say more about priming?
So then, you know, if in that day, whoever I had the fake fight with, if I see them and the issue comes up, I'm just ready. I'll go to like step 3, because I've already gone there in my mind when I had a regular or just a conversation and let things kind of play out like it already did. So that's what I kind of think of, having your soldiers ready, but maybe trying to work more to have them a little more at ease. So your soldiers are at ready, but trying to make sure that they don't start firing too early. Okay. Yeah, that's a very human experience, isn't it? I think a lot of us can think of a time when we do exactly that. The little voice in our head that's already setting up the conflict even before it happens. Very human of us. But stanza 2 then takes a turn. It says, but the next day. So in stanza 1, my soldiers have put down their guards and we're standing at ease. We're going to go have a cheeseburger. Stanza 2 says, but, right? Here comes the but. But the next day, negotiating the 2 narrow aisles of the Health and Harmony food store
When I say excuse me to the woman and her cart of organic chicken and green grapes, she pulls the cart not quite far back enough for me to pass. And a small mob in me begins picking up the fruit to throw. Why? I'm wondering, okay, so that's a kind of turning point now, or now we're back on guard, aren't we? We're back on guard. And I'm wondering a couple things here. First of all, what's your thoughts about the woman with the cart and why her behavior?
It seems like she's just not quite paying attention. Donna, what were you going to say?
I ran into her in the Camas Market in Hot Springs yesterday.
Aha!
Yes, I know her. So due to social distancing in that small space, there are now only 2 tables. So a friend and I were there, and we're going to have lunch. And so 2 gentlemen had sat at the one table for 4, appropriately, and I think they had already ordered, so we're waiting for their food. There was a lady at the other table for 4. She seemed dawdling and wandering to me, and she got up and left her backpack at the table. I told the 2 gentlemen that if she didn't come back shortly, I was going to just go ahead and sit down regardless of her backpack, or leg wrestle her to the floor for the table or something. So she finally came back and got her backpack. I mean, we almost had our lunches by that time, but I judged, yes I did, I judged her to be unobservant of what was going on around her, unaware. And that, to me, having no consideration for other people. There were only 2 tables. She obviously wasn't in any big hurry because she was still in the building probably 20 minutes later. So I guess that was part of my raising, was to be aware of other people and consider that before you take the last slice of cake.
So kind of an ethic there and how to get along. But you and Sam, you're both being very forgiving here. You're saying she's just unaware. Anything else?
No, but I really liked the part, I have an Irish redheaded temper, the line about the mob within me, where I was ready to start throwing organic fruit. I love that one.
The Irish mob in you.
Yes.
Good, thank you.
But the end of the story was, then another man came in for lunch, and he was carrying his motorcycle helmet. I thought maybe he had, was traveling around the highway, and that wasn't my town or my store, but I didn't want to seem like an ungracious host despite social distancing. So I said to my friend, would you mind if that man joined us at our table? And she said, oh, no, I'm okay with that. So I made that offer to him, and he came and joined us. And we had an interesting conversation. He probably has a viewpoint quite different from ours. But so, yeah.
Well, good. Thank you very much. I'm curious from others. So outside of maybe this woman being unaware, why else might she have not moved aside quite enough?
She was put out. She had her space marked out. She was shopping. She was doing her thing, and was annoyed by somebody interrupting her workspace, shopping, whatever.
And that's another possibility, isn't it? Kind of a territorial instinct or something. Dean just says she had her space staked out and she was holding on to it, holding her ground, right? We talked about holding our ground. Go ahead, I see. Tell me your name. Is it Leon?
Ione.
Ione.
Yes. So my thought about what the organic food meant was that she was very much focused on herself, which is why she doesn't move her cart. And she felt like she was a bit above the other woman in the aisle with the cart, because she is buying organic produce or goods, whereas the other, and it doesn't say that the other person isn't, but it's just that it's very self-centered and focused on her benefit.
And so now you're saying, you're using the word self-centered, so that's a little different than unaware, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So I thought that the unaware was very nice, and that could very well be what it is, but I just went a different path.
Okay. Anybody add to that? So we got a couple of proposals here. We got one that says maybe she's just unaware. One other says that maybe she's just being self-centered and not really wanting to think about anybody else.
I think she might be us when we don't want to step aside or pull back far enough.
Can you wait? Go back to that. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that if we're going to go back to what we discussed in the first paragraph about our soldiers and our guns, she's us when, okay, I'll concede, but I won't concede enough, or I won't concede far enough to really make things better.
So
good show of it.
I love this when you say that she's us, and a lot of us are going, yeah, that's right. I've done kind of crappy things.
I should actually not say us. I should own it. She is me.
Well, no, I want to own it too. And I see other people's faces here nodding and saying they have had that sort of experience too, where maybe they've kind of felt that, like the woman in the aisle there who doesn't want to cooperate for some reason or another.
I think the obvious answer for why she didn't move her cart this week, but we won't go there, would be white supremacy. But it's okay, we're done with that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead.
You had a mask on and she didn't, or she had a mask on and you didn't.
Yeah. And those are all things that are really kind of going on at the right now when you think about that close contact. I love the story in Hot Springs of the little place with 2 tables. That's a great example. But let's just push this a little wider for a second here then. And I just want to ask the question then, are people generally willing to get along, or are people generally not willing to get along?
And Nancy was going to add something maybe to the previous, or maybe you want to jump in on this question, Nancy.
Had some kind of cognitive impairment, and we never know what is going on with somebody else. And so that's what I was gonna bring up.
Yeah, Nancy, that's a good point. We're kind of just playing the game here of thinking the possibilities of what might be in someone else's head, but we don't know, do we? That's a very humane reminder for us.
Yeah, and today I had this happen while I was driving, and I got to a place where the car in front of me was waiting to turn, but she didn't pull forward enough for me to go around her, and I was getting mad, and I was like, oh, she doesn't know that I need to get around her. I don't know. I was thinking, am I going to honk my horn? No, I'm not going to honk my horn.
Am I going to throw the fruit?
Yeah. Lowell, I was also thinking that it's possible that she's a victim of the narrator's retelling.
Hey, that's poetic license, Dean.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, sure, it's the retelling, isn't it? And we don't know. I think these are good reminders that, we really can't vilify that other person because we don't know. And the narrator may have misunderstood the whole thing too. But maybe the focus here, though, is on that narrator's response and throwing the food at this person then. And so I want to go back, if I can please, to the question of, do people basically try to get along, or do people basically resist getting along?
Well, I think they try to get along. I think most people try to get along.
I feel a butt coming there.
Well, I don't know. There's certain people that are so opinionated that they're difficult to be around. And so I don't think they want to, they want to get along, but there's not that many people that are that adamantly.
If they don't want to get along, what do they want, do you think, Nancy?
They want to be in charge.
They want power?
Power, yeah.
I think that's a good start Nancy's got us on. Anybody add to that?
Or they want to be heard.
Want to be heard, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes we want to be heard in all the wrong ways. Does that make sense?
Mm-mm.
Yes. Does anyone take the case that people basically are uncooperative, but maybe we need the law and social pressure and other things to make us cooperate? Actually shaking his head no, so he thinks that's the wrong-headed direction. Why do you think that's the wrong direction, Dean?
My personal thought is just from my experience. I don't know the sociology behind it or anything, but it seems to me that when the lack of enforcement is around, people sort of take care of each other and set norms, rules, mores, and sort of organize themselves in ways that work for the hive or for the community.
So even when no one's looking and without enforcement, people still manage, by and large, to get along.
I think shame is a powerful motivator, and I also think kindness are the two carrots and sticks that we need. I don't think we need much more than that, usually.
Right, good.
My opinion.
Every once in a while in a conversation about this poem, someone takes a side that says, no, human behavior is basically antisocial. We would grab for ourselves what we could grab if we didn't have some restraints. Anybody feel that way? We have a total room of nice people, see?
I don't feel that way. Oh, listen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I feel like it takes a lot of energy to be in conflict with people, that it's draining. And so just status quo would be to try to get along unless you're really inflamed or passionate about something or someone's taking from you.
Others? Kim, go ahead.
I just think that this makes me think of the protests that have gone on all over the country in the last week, and whether you think that they're overly aggressive on one side or the other depends on who's defining the action. And so whether we're seen as cooperating or having valid points that that it would be cooperating to let them be heard are two very different sides of that. It depends on who's defining get along versus not get along, and what's appropriate behavior, what's selfish behavior.
What's appropriate, what's selfish, what's get along, what's not get along are slippery terms in some ways. Okay, good.
And I think it's important.
Janet, did you have something? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I just think it's also important not to conflate feeling passionate about something and strongly about something and acting strongly with basically thinking that people are not good or, whatever. I mean, I think that there's this, unless we speak slowly and quietly, which my students know that there's no way in hell that's going to happen, right? That somehow we think that people are bad when in fact we're just trying to be very, people could think. I was reading something and watching an interview with Cornel West, and I mean, you could think that, right? Because he's on fire a lot. But really he's talking about the good in people so often, right? But just in a way that's very explosive. And so I think it's important not to conflate those two.
Good, thank you very much. And how about Janet? I see you're trying to jump in.
No, just thinking.
Thinking very loudly though.
Uh-oh.
Okay, good. Well, so the next stanza, the third stanza talks about, says so many voices arguing in myself. We talked a little bit about, Randy was talking about those voices already arguing in herself, but so many voices arguing in myself into the long hours of the mild spring afternoon. I'm the God. No, I'm the God. No, I'm the God. What's thoughts on that? What is she getting at there?
Well, it would imply power and control, wouldn't it? I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. I mean, she didn't capitalize it. So I'm thinking it's not about God. It's about control. It's about power. It's about who gets the last word.
Who gets the last word? Who's the most powerful?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Anybody add to that? That's a good start.
But I thought of those as all voices within the same head. And so it makes me think of the term warring emotions, that every one of our emotions is a God that wants to override other emotions.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And again, if you think of the human experience there, again, I see people nodding like we've all had those arguments in our head, haven't we? We've all had those moments where one argument or the other is very persuasive and we want to act out on that argument. And of course, we know those moments. This might be a good time to ask, in our opening reflection, I asked you to think about a time when you were maybe moved to act in order against someone else in order to bring what you felt was bring about justice or bring about the right thing. But you restrained yourself, and I asked, why did you restrain yourself? Does anybody have an example, a story you could tell us about that one? Remember, you don't have to share this one, but I'd just be curious if someone's brave.
I have one.
Okay.
I spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time in the Middle East, and in particular in the West Bank. And when I'm there, that's where I live in Bethlehem, and I take the bus a lot to Jerusalem, right? Because Jerusalem's magic, and if you can, you should. And every time I go, all the Palestinians have to get off the bus. But since I have a US passport, I don't have to get off the bus and be checked. And every fiber of me wants to be really antagonistic. Like, I'm getting off the bus also, and I'm going to stand with the women. And I just really want to push hard on that. And then I have to wonder, am I serving me? Am I serving them? Am I making their lives easier or actually making their lives much harder?
Janet, you just gave me the shivers. That's a great example. Yeah.
So I've had to keep my mouth shut on more than one occasion. I have to say one time I didn't, and it didn't go well, but.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your reasoning process again. You were saying, am I being self-serving? Am I doing something for others? Talk more about that.
Right. And all I could think of was, what is my motivation? Am I going to change what the Israeli military does? No. Am I going to delay the bus and somebody might be late for work or late for something? Might it be that they get everybody off the bus and they say, okay, this bus isn't going any further because that's happened? There's all these scenarios. And I think, and yet if I just keep my mouth shut, maybe there'll be another way to express my displeasure. Yeah. And so it's not easy, but.
So here we are in humanities territory where instead of finding the quick answers, we're making things more complex and we understand the questions a little more deeply, don't we? Yeah, that's a great example. That's a perfect example. I'm going to have to steal that one for future conversations because
absolutely.
It's a big one. Good. Steal away. Anybody else have one? You don't have to top it.
I was going to say that's hard to follow.
Oh, no, really.
So mine, this was many years ago. I was walking downtown Missoula in the middle of the day, and someone was crossing Higgins with the light, and someone in a truck wanted to turn and didn't see him and almost hit him. And then the guy in the truck started like screaming at the pedestrian. And I kind of like gave him a look, and I wanted to engage and tell him like, they had a walk sign. and he saw me and started yelling at me, and I just totally backed off. But the reason that I backed off it wasn't questions about my own motivations or anything like that. It was fear. I was afraid if I engaged that I could get hurt. It was just a personal fear like that stopped me.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very honest statement, isn't it? That sometimes fear stops us. But you went through a kind of complex thought process again in trying to figure out what is the right thing to do in that situation. Okay? And fear maybe stopped you, but imaginatively, what do you think might have happened if you had acted out?
I mean, what I hoped would happen was that the guy in the truck would be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. They had the walk sign." But what I thought would happen was he would get out of his truck, or he would drive his truck into the sidewalk. I don't know.
So things might de-escalate, or things might escalate. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it could. Yeah, those are funny questions, aren't they? Times when we just don't know. Well, those are two great examples. Any more?
I live such an exciting life. The day after the market event, the next morning, I, similar to Jeanette, was involved in a conversation, and the statements that people made were quite contrary to what I believe, and I believe that our language carries a lot of weight. I think it flashed through my mind to say, is that kind of language promoting or supporting the hateful, the violence, and it involved gun violence? Is that kind of language, is that promoting that? I think I was a little intimidated. Up here where I live in Sanders County, I'm a trickle of blue and a sea of red. And part of this involved an authority, part of this involved neighbors, and it was a little bit sensitive time. It was right at the time of a death. So I think maybe a little bit of respect, but also definitely a degree of intimidation. But as I think back about it, I wish I would have said that, you know. Up here we have, a lot of people have signs on the outside of their houses instead of welcome or cute little flowers. It's like, I don't call 911, I have a 357. So that was involved in that conversation there, so.
Well, you said to start with Donna about language. You said language really is an important factor in figuring out how we get along. Can you say more about that?
I remember through a faith organization that I belonged to, and clear back in the 70s, at one point, some young lady in this big conference meeting kept standing up and wanting a correction made to the meeting minutes, that instead of his, he, that it be at least made general neutral. And, you know, by the end of the first day, we were all kind of laughing and rolling our eyes. And by the end of the third day, we were expecting her to do it, and maybe somebody else did it for her. But I realized then that thing really does make a difference. You know, it seems like a minor detail, but that really does factors in. The things that people talk about and tell jokes about. If you don't take a stand and stand up and say, you know, that this doesn't help the situation, or that encourages, or at least sounds like that you're supporting those kind of behaviors, I think that really matters.
So sometimes language can be like throwing the fruit.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks. Well, the final stanza asks a couple of questions. Let's address those questions. And the two questions are this: how can I discipline my own army? So we're back to that military metaphor again. How can I discipline my own army? And the second question is, how can I disarm when my enemy seems so intent? How can I discipline my own army? And how can I disarm when my enemy seems so intent?
Well, to go back to my example of having the fake fight in my head, I think I've just had to realize my enemies aren't really there and that I'm safe.
And how do you do that?
it's just taken years of like actual experience of saying like, oh, I thought this thing would happen and it didn't. And the enemies, I think that not everyone's against me. And it's almost like self-centered to think that you have to fight everyone or always being ready for the fight. So I think, and a big one was just realizing that I am safe and that things are okay. So that just being aware of it, and then just developing strategies. Like I said, when I feel my thoughts going there, realizing my thoughts are going there, just divert, think about something else, do something else.
So are you saying what helped was what we call a reality check?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that what it is? A reality check?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. But sometimes some of it, I think it could be real. I just moved here from a small community in Texas where I did have to be outspoken. I was a faculty member at a small college there. And so because I had the protections of tenure and academic freedom, I could speak pretty openly. And I needed to around some issues in the community. And there was a lot of blowback. And I think some of it I did have to, what I was feeling was real, but I had to just kind of find the balance there of, okay, even if it is real, I'm okay. It's, okay. You know, I don't, I think, just realizing I was okay and I would be safe.
So you were sort of disarming, even though you recognize that your enemy seems so intent?
Yeah, maybe my enemy wasn't as powerful as I thought.
Okay, great. Who else can address those two questions then? How can I discipline my own army? And how can I disarm when my enemy seems so intent?
I might flip it from Randy's example. I like the fake fight analogy and metaphor and reality. And you can look internally and you can say, how do I disarm myself? How do I go through the cognitive distortions about reality? And maybe those things aren't as real as I thought they were. And those are the things you do internally. But also, I wonder if you flip the question about how do I disarm my army, but how do I disarm the other person in a friendly manner because I mean, in peace and conflict and in mediation training situations, your work is to help notice somebody who's agitated or potentially agitated and promote a disarming of them. Let them know that you're on their side. Good morning, good afternoon, how's your family? You know, sort of immediately disarming them might be a technique.
Yeah, isn't it funny, there again, that's language, we use that term disarming, right? As if we're all carrying arms and we need to be disarmed. But we're gonna, I don't want to run out of time here before we tackle this question. And I love coming back to this because usually I wish I could see your faces in a room right now. Why the title?
Yvonne, I saw you were going to maybe say something earlier too.
Well, my technique in disarming is usually to try to think of where the other person's coming from. You know, try to walk in their moccasins or whatever the thought is. That sort of like, Lowell, what you were in your preview when you quoted from Aristotle to just, you know, try to grasp what that other is where they're coming from, what their idea is, and you know, at least give them the respect of being able to have a different point of view.
And that can be there's that term again, very disarming, can't it? To just sort of acknowledge that you hear the other person. Yeah. But again, who can address why the title?
I guess on the most kind of basic level, it's about governing oneself. How do we govern all of these emotions and defenses that we put out? And that's what governance is acknowledging and coming to some sort of a democratic agreement inside yourself about these factions.
Good. All right, who can add to that? That's a good start. There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm always struck by that question of why the title. I still haven't got any pat answer to that. I think that's a good start to say it's all about governing ourselves. Does it go beyond that?
Well, I think like we are using this poem to talk about current events. The poem is using this kind of this idea of personal governance and internal governance to talk about governments and armies and disarming actual like nations' armies, and to think about who has the power and why we might be in conflict and what we're struggling against and how we might back away or why we don't.
Okay, so Sam, you're pushing it beyond the self to now the collective, and the collective in some ways can be viewed as a body on its own in some ways that needs to govern itself like we need to govern our singular body. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly.
Can you say any more about that?
You know, also that in a democracy, we the people are the government. And so each individual with these internal conflicts is, you know, we are the people who make up the actual bureaucracy and the, you know, fill the positions in every level of government in the United States. So if we can't govern ourselves personally, you know, what does that say about our democracy?
Yeah, that was very eloquently stated. You kind of gave me the shivers there with "we the people," because suddenly that language comes really alive, doesn't it? We the people, not just me the individual, but we the people are a body too that is responsible in some ways, aren't we? Okay, good. Well, so we have a few minutes left here, and this is usually I end by having what we call a go round, and I don't know if this works online or not, but I was hoping everyone would participate. And it just means we take 60 seconds to reflect again on a question that I'll give you. And then everyone takes a turn just giving, you know, a 30, 40-second response to the question. It's just, what's your takeaway? What's your takeaway from our conversation? But in this case, what's your takeaway? How do you relate this conversation to what's going on in current events? Because there's so much going on around us, you know, that we don't want to ignore that in our conversation now. Let's connect it to that stuff going around us. How do you relate what we've been talking about and some of the thoughts we've come up in here? Is there something specific that you will carry away and think of and use in order to sort of think about or make sense or make meaning of current events around us now? So take 60 seconds, and if you're a conscientious objector to having to answer this question, that's okay too. I won't have you shot today. I won't do that. But if you would, please join in. I'd encourage everyone to do that. But let's take 60 seconds and just think for a moment, reflect for a moment on what you might take away from this conversation that can be of value in helping you process and understand what's going on around us in the world today. So 60 seconds. There's 60 seconds again. I was watching Yvonne and Jeff because they're the experts. I wanted to see how they do it. But Yvonne, can you start maybe? Would you tell us what you were thinking about?
And you notice that Jeff faded out of the picture. Being shy. Well, you know, we've been, since we've been in the humanities circles, I mean, the thoughts aren't necessarily that new to probably any of us. I think I'm really grateful to hear the poem, and I love the imagery of the both. I mean, I think the armies and the mobs are very, relevant to what we're seeing right now, and I just think it's very both the internal and then like the third stanza when so many kingdoms and so many gods and all that. I mean, this is just very depicting of strife in our world right now.
Okay. Good. Thanks, Yvonne. So Yvonne, we go way back to Margaret Kingsland days with Humanities Montana when it was Montana Committee for the Humanities, wasn't it? Yeah.
1990.
1990. So who else? Who's next?
I think a lot of the input from people in this conversation about, creating the fight in your head and how satisfying it is to feel armed sometimes. But then there's a line at the end of the poem that says something about my troops want more money, which is how depleting it is as well, how much energy it takes to be armed. And I want to keep thinking about that.
What's the cost? Yeah. Good. Who's next?
What Jeanette said really stuck with me. What are my motivations, and am I helping? Is this for me? Am I saying something to make myself feel better, or am I saying something because it will make a difference? And I think that it depends on the situation, and sometimes you really have to speak to make a difference, and sometimes you need to let someone else speak and not take the floor.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Next.
I think it's also maybe if we go back to the woman who, for whatever reason, didn't back up far enough, or if it's me that doesn't back up far enough, I think it's important to think about people's motivations and not immediately assign the sinister. Right. And I think it's really easy. And especially when I see people not wearing a mask and I think they should, I can go to judgment pretty fast. But maybe they have a breathing, something that they can't breathe. I mean, I don't know, right? I couldn't possibly know. So I think it's also in how do we make that space to understand a little bit better? How do we get our own internal army to step down? To use Aggie, what somebody else used before. Yeah.
These are great takeaways. Another one?
Okay. I have a problem when people have an opinion than me. And a lot of times I say, well, I haven't studied this. I'm not an expert, so I really don't know. And this is how I feel, but when I'm kind of like the outcast in my family. I'm liberal, they're all conservative, and I don't know how to talk to them because they get kind of worked up and they start bad-mouthing stuff, and I wish I knew how to talk to them. So I don't know if this poem helped that, except
Yeah, I always joke that, if soldiers carried poems instead of guns, that nobody'd come to the war. So, Ione, do you have something?
Oh, well, a little bit of it has been said already, I think. But I heard that there is a lot of turmoil in the world today. We all probably have some inner turmoil amongst ourselves about what is right and what is wrong, and that we need to give that woman in the grocery store with the organic produce, for Pete's sakes, a little grace. Maybe this isn't all about her, and that jumping into judgment, that maybe we need to step back and listen, and then maybe go into a thoughtful conversation.
Right. There's a couple more of you. You don't have to go, but I'd sure be interested. Go ahead, Donna.
Good, thank you.
I
couldn't help but think about the current situation reading that poem. That was just at the forefront of my mind. But my reflection was that I'm going to not call someone on language. I'm not going to confront them on their language, but I'm going to reflect back to them my opinion on their language.
All right, good. Last ones?
Well, this is Dean. I was thinking that, especially not just the poem, but everyone's comments and reflections on it today made me think that suffering is universal. It's part of being human. And we never know where somebody came from or where they're headed or what just happened to them. And so I think somebody just said grace. I think that's important. And I think rather than a rush to judgment, I think most people are seeking justice, and justice requires grace and a pause. So thank you for poetry that gives us that pause.
Well, unless there's someone else out there who hasn't shared yet that wants to, part of my training is to end on a high spot. Dean's very eloquent statement there is a great place to leave it. If you're like me, I wish that you were all here and we could, have a glass of wine or something now and continue talking. And let's do it again, Sam and Kim and Randy. I'd love to do more of these. This is my first time online. I think it works. Did it work for you?
Mm-hmm. It was great. Thank you so much, Lowell.
Thank you.
And we will be here again next Friday for another virtual happy hour with Elizabeth Bars talking about veterans experience and military culture.
Aha.
Wow.
Which I think is a nice tie-in with the poem. A nice follow-up. We'll see.
So really nice to meet y'all or see old friends again. And happy trails.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks.
Good.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Yvonne.